What is the heaviest song of all time that reached the mainstream pop charts? In other words, which metal song put the most breakdowns, the most screaming, the most blast beats ever into the normie realm, and people actually listened to it, and it charted on the mainstream pop charts? Before writing and researching this video, I had a guess, but I ended up being proven wrong, and I was quite surprised, as I'm sure you will be too. Metal's history in the mainstream pop charts is a strange one. Compared to other genres, which seem to have their time in the sun for a longer period of time, the popularity of metal seems to come in shorter, more concentrated bursts, where for a short while, metal becomes very popular, and then shortly after that, becomes cringe. First of all, the boring stuff. I only counted songs that charted on the US Billboard Hot 100 pop chart. I'm sure somewhere in the world, Napalm Death or Amir charted in maybe Finland or some other European country, but to keep this list manageable and short and not have this video take up hours, I restricted it to just the Hot 100. We could look at the mainstream rock charts all we want, but we know we're gonna find metal there, we know we're gonna find heavy music there. To me, for this list specifically, I just wanted to see which song was the heaviest that ever made it onto the mainstream pop charts. You know, the ones that people would listen to at clubs or played on the radio. Not that this is all the case with all these songs. I hope you get my meaning. Secondly, what makes a song heavy? How can we even quantify this? This is a very subjective, opinion-based thing. However, this is my video. Heavy might mean something different to me. But in general, the louder, more down-tuned, screamed, or breakdown-filled the song, the heavier it is to me. Lastly, to avoid all potential problems with copyright, I will include links to all songs talked about in the description along with timestamps. Over 50 years ago, we were starting out with the all-time classic Paranoid, the first undeniable real metal track to ever chart on the Hot 100. Entering the charts on November 28th, 1970, what can you even say about Paranoid? An extremely iconic song with an extremely iconic first riff, driving drums, a thumping bass that's very fuzzy. This whole song just has a very thick sound, if that makes any sense. Ozzy's vocals are roaring, echoey, and just have this very ethereal production to them, along with the sort of lyrics about paranoid and mental health and losing your mind, right? What a great track, and I'm sure you know how good the track is. I don't really need to go on about it. That being said, about a year and a half later, Black Sabbath once again charts with their single for Iron Man. On January 29th, 1972, Iron Man would reach a position of number 52 Top 100 charts. And to me, Iron Man, definitely a heavier song than Paranoid. Paranoid might be a little bit of a faster track, a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more driving. However, Iron Man is just crushingly heavy, if it's even possible, an even more iconic riff somehow. And to think this song reached number 52 in 1972, it just seems very, very interesting to me. Like, what an interesting thing. Like, kind of what was going on in the early 70s there? The Black Sabbath was reaching number 52 on the hot charts. I suppose it was just a very novel experience, very original, very fresh. Reaching number 52, Iron Man would be Black Sabbath's highest charting song ever, as well as it'll take the throne for heaviest song on this list for about the next decade or so. Let's continue on. But before we get to the next track that will dethrone Iron Man, there were some honorable mentions. Led Zeppelin would chart more than a couple times in the 70s, but I'm sure you would agree that none of these tracks are heavier than Iron Man. Perhaps you could have put Immigrant Song. I don't know. Immigrant Song to me just not nearly as heavy as Paranoid or Iron Man. None of the other tracks that charted 1970s from Led Zeppelin were either. Another track was 1976's The Boys Are Back in Town. Peaking at number 12, Thin Lizzy's dual guitar attack proved to be very popular, a dual guitar approach that became nearly synonymous with metal music. However, again, The Boys Are Back in Town is just simply not a very heavy song, especially when you compare it to Iron Man or Paranoid. AC/DC is another heavy hard rock band which would chart in the late 70s and early 80s. Classic tracks like You Shook Me All Night Long, Back in Black, Highway to Hell are all decently heavy for the era as well. Especially Highway to Hell. Highway to Hell is a good contender. But regardless, none of these tracks come close to knocking Black Sabbath off of their heaviness throne. And with 2 of these tracks breaking the top 40, it's another sign that mainstream culture is becoming more and more accepting of heavier music after having Black Sabbath chart in the early 70s, with You Shook Me All Night Long reaching number 35 in September of 1980. However, after nearly a decade, the reign of Black Sabbath would come to an end. In 1982, with the release of Judas Priest's legendary and absolutely iconic album, Screaming for Vengeance, and the single, You've Got Another Thing Coming. Peaking at number 62, You've Got Another Thing Coming is the first song clearly argue is heavier than Iron Man or Paranoid. It contains the classic 80s metal riffing, pedaling the palm-muted E string with power chords. It's up-tempo, metallic, guitars are heavily distorted, has a ripping solo, Rob's signature vocals are snarled throughout the song. Complete with an extremely catchy hook, it's no wonder the song was accepted by mainstream audiences. It's just an all-time metal song and takes the heaviest track of all time as of 1980. 10 years after Judas Priest takes the throne for heaviest mainstream hit, but how long will this dominance last? After all, the 80s were the pinnacle for metal and mainstream culture, right? Another notable metal band that would achieve mainstream success in the 1980s would be Def Leppard. A lot of classic tracks, including the first metal #1 and Love Bites. None of these songs are close to being heavier than Judas Priest, and I'm sure you can argue that as well. Another notable example would be 1983's Come On Feel the Noise by Quiet Riot, the first metal song to crack the top 10. Again, a decent track, but, if you ask me to think of the quintessential 80s metal sound, this would be one of those songs that would top the list to me. So it's not very heavy, kind of rocks a little bit. It's a good song, but it's not nearly as heavy as You Got Another Thing Coming. There are a few tracks which could be considered as challenges to You've Got Another Thing Coming. Notably, Looks That Kill by Motley Crue. I think that is a very, very close contender. It's sort of got the same riff style of the palm-muted pedaled E string with your power chord riffs. However, Motley Crue just isn't that heavy. I don't know what to say. Lay It Down by Rat is another contender. Probably the best riff so far on this list. Absolutely killer riff. The rest of the song just isn't that heavy. Welcome to the Jungle, another, rockin' song. It's just not compared to You've Got Another Thing Coming. All 3 of these tracks are challenges for the heaviness throne, but to me, all these tracks are just missing the chunkiness of You Got Another Thing Coming. All of them are killer songs with great riffs. But what is more indicative is a continuation of the trend of metal and heavier music in general becoming more acceptable and palatable in mainstream pop culture. We all know this, right? The 80s are the decade of hair metal, with metal bands being some of the biggest musical acts on the planet and the genre exploding in the number of bands and the diversity of sound. But all this changes in 1989 when Metallica released the single For One, along with a killer music video.
Digging my hair, digging my arms, digging my legs, digging my soul.
Peaking at number 35. 35. One is a huge departure from everything else on this list so far. By far and easily the heaviest song so far in this list. One is a long, dark, progressive, and one of the most iconic and influential breakdowns of all time is in this song as well. The guitar palm muted chugging combined with the double bass machine drum kicks is an absolutely fundamental part of modern metal. I mean, think about that for a second. Think of how many bands have used that since, including some very influential ones in their own regard. Pantera, metalcore bands, groove metal. The album version is over 7 minutes long, and they had to cut out 2 minutes for radio play. I'm sure I don't need to describe to you just how good the song is. One would also not be topped for a decade in heaviness in the mainstream charts. The only real challengers in the 90s being Metallica themselves, with Enter Sandman and Sad But True. Sad But True being a very heavy, powerful song in its own regard, but I just don't consider it heavier than One in my mind. One is just faster, more explosive. Sad But True's got that chonk, but I mean, One is just, One, right? Megadeth also had a top 100 hit in Symphony of Destruction from 1992's Countdown to Extinction, another great heavy song. A little bit of a slower track from Megadeth's catalog so far that time in the 90s and 80s. Heavy track, great riff, another iconic song, but honestly, to me, it's not heavier than One by Metallica. One notable song from the mid-90s would be Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden, the first song on this list to make use of a drop D guitar tuning. Drop tuning has become a large part of metal in the 90s and into the 2000s. It would not be until 1999 when one would finally be dethroned, as in the late 90s, a new combination of metal with various other genres and low tunings provided us with renewed mainstream interest in heavy music. This pick right here will likely be controversial, so please leave your opinions in the comments, but one would finally be overcome by the almighty Limp Bizkit. Nookie is a loud, aggressive, chunky, rowdy, and rap metal track. It will likely take the championship in terms of lowest ever tuned Hot 100 hit, with the guitars being tuned to a strange tuning of F sharp, which is almost one full octave lower than a normal guitar. While one is heavy in terms of a speedy thrash metal sense, Nookie to me is heavy in a very different way. Fred Durst also delivers some very aggressive screams in the chorus of Nookie, which combined with the groovy main riff makes a song the absolute current contender for the heaviest song. I also absolutely love the snare sound in this song. You could also make an argument for their 2000 song Rollin', which peaked at number 65, but to me, Nookie is just the heavier Limp Bizkit mainstream chart single. However, unlike the previous champions, Limp Bizkit would not retain the championship for very long, as in 2001, Linkin Park would release Hybrid Theory with the single One Step Closer.
Shut up when I'm looking at you! Shut up!
Tuned to drop C sharp, One Step Closer contains the heaviest moment to have made into the Hot 100 so far, with the breakdown section containing screamed vocals along with drop tuned chugging. This easily surpasses Nookie for heaviest track to me, as to me we are finally moving closer to what considered today to be heavy modern metal. Not to mention that this is probably the first mainstream Hot 100 track to actually contain screamed harsh vocal. A very impressive feat for 2001. They take the top spot for heaviest track of all time. But they too would not last long on top of the heaviness heap, as in 2003, Godsmack had a Hot 100 hit with their single Straight Out of Line. Straight Out of Line is just a punishingly heavy track. Godsmack's production is just thick and heavy, and so despite containing no screaming or breakdowns, it's just an undeniably heavy metal track. And the fact that it made it to number 73 on this list, which is higher than both One Step Closer and Nookie, is always remarkable to me, as I feel like Straight Out of Line has not had the cultural impact, relevance that Nookie and One Step Closer have actually had. Just an interesting little side note there. But alas, they too would have their time in the sun cut short, but this time by the first repeat offender on our list.
The very worst part of you! Yes, no! This isn't what I wanted to be. I never thought that what I said would have you running from me like this. This isn't what I wanted to be. I never
2004's Lying From You is another Linkin drop tuning banger. Peaking at number 58 on the Hot 100, it contains a breakdown riff that would honestly not sound out of place on a 2022 metalcore release, complete with Chester's brutal screams. Just another very heavy song from our boys in Linkin Park. Especially the breakdown sections of Linkin Park songs, and the first two albums at least, are all very, very heavy. But Lying From You combines metalcore, hardcore, drop tuning breakdown riff with record scratching, rapping, and screams. Perhaps that made it a little bit more palatable to mainstream audiences. But regardless, what just an absolutely punishingly heavy track. However, they too would also be dethroned shortly when just under a year later, in 2005, System of a Down released the single BYOB, which peaked at number 27! Number 27, if you can believe that, on the Billboard Hot 100.
Where the fuck are you? Where the fuck are you?
For me, this is one of the first really heavy songs I ever remember hearing on the radio. I was about 11 years old when this song came out, and I remember just thinking, oh my god, what is this on the radio? I was absolutely blown away and hooked immediately. It was probably Metallica or System of a Down which started my descent into the metal mosh pit of music, so to speak. But even still, BYOB is a real outlier on this list. First of all, it is at a screaming tempo of 198, extremely fast, and drops C-sharp tuning. It contains double bass, screaming vocals, and perhaps even for the first and last time probably ever in the Hot 100, blast beats. 2 sections of blast beats even. Blast beats and screaming in the top 40 too. Just think about that. 2005, blast beats and screaming in the top 40. There must have been something in the water in the early 2000s, I swear. BYOB represents probably the peak of heaviness acceptance in mainstream music. BYOB also represents probably the peak of heaviness acceptance in mainstream music, as I don't think there would ever be a song since, or probably ever, which will contain the same elements that BYOB had to make it to such a high charting position, 40 charts. BYOB's throne would be mostly completely unchallenged. The only notable exceptions would be 2006's Bat Country by Avenged Sevenfold, which peaked at number 60 on the top 100 charts, and 2011's Under and Over It by Five Finger Death Punch peaked at number 77. However, to me, both of these tracks failed to compete with BYOB in terms of heaviness checkmarks. Although they're both heavy in their own right, especially the Five Finger Death Punch track, it was close. It almost contains a little bit more industrial elements to it. It sounds heavy, it's very heavy, thickness to it. However, it just doesn't contain the same elements that BYOB had, although it was close. And thus, we have found our answer. System of a Down's 2005 classic BYOB is the heaviest Hot 100 hit of all time, which just goes to show you that great songwriting filled with many hooks can overcome the normies' aversion to blast beats and screaming. After this, with radio becoming less important and streaming rising in popularity, heavy music was pretty much entirely absent from mainstream charts, which became dominated by indie rock, EDM, trap, and of course pop music. That is, until July 2022. The Stranger Things sync blasted this late 80s thrash metal classic to number 40 on the Billboard Hot 100. Absolute riffs, oppressive atmosphere and production, long song structure, snarled vocals, and heavy, poignant, relatable lyrics make this an easy choice for me. In terms of heaviest song of all time to reach the Hot 100 mainstream charts, Obey Your Master. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually BYOB. BYOB is definitely the heaviest song to ever reach the Hot 100. Even better still, it reached the top 40. But what the Master of Puppets' resurgence in popularity does prove is that metal, even extreme heavy metal, has had a definite profound impact on pop culture and the way people remember certain decades, especially the 80s. Very important to consider. And anyways, that's the video. Thanks for sticking around. My name is Varvis. Please check out my music. I have my band Soul Runner, as well as my vaporwave and hip hop, all linked in the description. If you like this video, please give it a like. Disagree with what I said, want to call me a dumbass, leave a comment giving me your opinion. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoy content like this on metal music, I'm going to be making more of it, especially a lot on the late 2000s metalcore scene. So if that's something that interests you, please hit me with that subscribe. Thank you so very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Hey,